Howdy. Today's distance learning lesson in AP Human Geography is the environmental impact of industrialization. During this unit, we've looked at industrialization, we've looked at different types of jobs, where jobs are shifting around the world, who's manufacturing everything, stages country, Rothschild stages that countries go through in manufacturing, and we've looked at a lot of stuff. Last week, you researched a topic, and I hoped you would actually take a look at one of the more specific problems that come from the environmental impacts of industrialization. So today, I wanted to do just a quick PowerPoint to hit some of the main thoughts so you understand the basic concepts of it. So let's take a look. I think that one of the biggest ways we're going to look at it is the atmosphere. The atmosphere, that area that surrounds the Earth that makes the Earth a livable thing. And that atmosphere, that thin layer of gas on top of this blue marble that we live on, that is what we're talking about. One of the biggest impacts, environmental impacts of industrialization, is on our atmosphere. And so I want to look at today about, so what's breaking this down? What's the problem? And I know this is controversial, so I'm just going to try to hit it from a simple point of view. You are welcome to have your own points of view. There's a lot of different ways of looking at it, but we want to take a look at some of the basic facts behind it, or basic options or opinions. All right. One of the biggest things we have to look at with our environment is pollution. Pollution does seem to have an impact on our atmosphere. But it can be natural and it can be also man-made. A natural effect on the atmosphere would be volcanic action. I mean, when volcanoes erupt, they throw gas and they throw dust and stuff in the air, and it has an impact. When Mount Krakatoa went, it threw dust all around the earth, and they say that sunsets for a year or two are really red. I remember when I was in the service, I was up in Washington when Mount St. Helens blew, and it was an impact. You could see all the dust that was thrown up in the air. You could see that cloud. So that does have an impact, and it can impact the earth, because when you get stuff, an atmosphere, dirt and stuff like that in the atmosphere than volcanoes, it can have a long-term effect. But also pollution, we think, might have an effect going up in the atmosphere. But the big question is always, how much? Is the world so big that man can't mess it up, or is man messing it up? And that leads to global warming, which is a very controversial issue. So we'll take a look at it, what people say it is, and you get to make your own mind up on that. We're also going to take a look at a couple more things like acid rain, when you start getting pollutants in the air and it comes down mixed with the moisture, hole in the ozone layer, and possibly a little bit more also about like deforestation. So let's take a look at some of these things. First off, the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect is natural. This is what makes the earth livable. The rays from the sun hit the earth, and radiated heat is different. The wavelength of radiated heat is different than the wavelength that comes in. It's kind of like if you park your car in the parking lot in the summertime. The sun's rays come through, the light comes through the glass. It hits your car, absorbs the heat, and it radiates it out. That's why when you open that door, that wave of heat just hits you. The light comes in, but heat is a different wavelength. It's like if you look at a hot road in the summertime and you see the what radiates off from the road, you can kind of see that heat just radiate up, and you know it's going to be hot. Well, the greenhouse effect, 2 degrees, is what we need for the Earth. The sun's rays heat this Earth up. Planets like Venus that have a very extensive atmosphere, the heat is unlivable. Other planets don't have strong atmospheres, and they're not. The cold temperature is really intense. But the neat thing about the Earth is so beautiful. It's such a beautifully designed mechanism where it transfers the heat around the Earth. Heat that hits the Earth and absorbs more on the equator is moved in the ocean by ocean currents around. You have warm ocean currents, you have cold ocean currents. And the neat thing is during the daytime, all the heat that comes in eventually will radiate out. You have to have a balance. That's why, like in the wintertime, if you have cloudy days, it holds some of that heat in and it won't get so cold. Whereas night, when there's no clouds, it gets really cold at night. That heat just radiates so much easier. But the greenhouse effect is a natural thing, and that's what makes the Earth livable. What some people would say is that with other reasons of pollutants and stuff, the greenhouse effect is thrown out of effect by pollution in the air and other stuff in the air, which makes it harder for that heat to radiate out. And that leads to the concept of global warming. Again, controversial, but you're allowed to make whatever decision you want. Just try to give you the background. But when people say greenhouse effect, remember, that's natural. That's what makes the world livable. The sun's rays come in, heat the earth up, radiates the heat, and eventually it leaves everything. And when it's hot in the northern hemisphere, it's summer here, it's winter down to the southern hemisphere. It all moves. Now, global warming is more of is again, it's controversial, but it says that we have put so much carbon dioxide in the air, methane, other gases and stuff in the air, that pollutants that we put in the air is in effect like a blanket holding more of that heat into the Earth's atmosphere than it should. And these gases, they trap the heat, and it changes the long-term temperature of the Earth. And one of the biggest arguments always for global warming is that as things heat up, the ice caps in Antarctica will melt and the sea levels will rise, and that'll affect the Earth. Now, again, controversial, you make up your own mind, but that's what they're saying when they talk about global warming. So it's excessive greenhouse effect. Now, some of the biggest examples that people look at is Greenland and Antarctica. I was in Antarctica back as deep freeze 80, and a chunk of ice had broken off, and it was a big iceberg, like 12 miles or whatever. So my icebreaker, we had to go out, and we sent a helicopter out, and they put this transponder-like thing on it so the scientists could track it, because that was a big chunk of ice. Well, a lot more than that has been breaking off. If you take a look at the picture, look at the ice shelf there as it breaks off. Now, the ice shelf, kind of like an ice cube on water, as it melts in the water. It doesn't affect the water so much. It's the rest of the ice that's on Greenland and Antarctica they're talking about. If that melts, then you have a problem, because excessive seawater going in raises the level. If you look at the pictures of Greenland on the thing there, Greenland has been losing more ice than we're used to. Now, again, whether that's a natural cycle or a man-made cycle, that's for a lot of dispute, and a lot of politicians have disagreements about it. But if you go to Greenland, you see there's more and more water running out from underneath those huge, massive, huge ice shields, and that's what they're talking about. A lot of the places, like if you go to South America or if you go to the Alps, you go up the mountains and look where the glaciers are. The glaciers have been retreating. And people that believe in global warming would say that's because the Earth is getting warmer and that's affecting it. Well, you can go to not just South America here, but you can go to North America or Europe, and you're going to see that there's a lot of different studies about the ice sheets up in the mountains, and it does seem to be some disappearance of them. This chart has been used by people like Al Gore, and in his movie An Inconvenient Truth, he argued back in after 2000 that global warming was being caused by pollution in the air, and they started looking at average temperatures. And you have to take a look at how the temperatures have been changing, it seems to be. Now, some people would say that's natural, and we do go through cycles. Yes, that's true. Some people would say it's not natural, and the Earth is getting warmer and warmer. Every time I look in the news and stuff, it seems to show that somewhere is having the hottest temperatures, not in a day. Global warming isn't about temperatures in a day in a place. It's overall climate, which is weather in a place over a period of time, usually a year. So global warming doesn't have daylight change, because I remember this winter, it went outside, it was pretty cold for a couple of days. It's what's the average climate temperature, okay? And it does seem to be changing. But keep in mind, we have had in the past ice ages too. Many of you ever saw the movie Ice Age? Remember the movie with Manny, the mastodon and all? We have had ice ages. The big argument again, is this man-made or not man-made? Is it natural or not natural? And that is way above me, a humble geographer. Now, if you do have oceans that rise, it changes stuff. If you look at this picture here, the Gulf Stream starts down in the Caribbean waters off Florida and all. It's really warm, and that Gulf Stream goes all the way up. Now, the wind patterns in this part of the world are from west to east. Think about it in America. Our patterns are west to east. And so as the wind goes over the ocean, over that Gulf Stream, it affects Europe. If you take a look at the map, look at Ireland. Ireland is the same latitude as northern Canada. And northern Canada can get a little bit colder in the wintertime. Just ask those people who live in Saskatoon or, Flin Flon about that. And then look at Ireland. The Gulf Stream does have an effect on Europe. What people believe in global warming say that if enough water gets into the Atlantic from Greenland and these other areas, that could shift the Gulf Stream, and that could change temperatures. There was a movie that came out about this not too long ago, The Day After Tomorrow, and Hollywood makes a dramatic view of this to show everybody nothing happens that quickly, except in Hollywood, okay? But that's what we're talking about here with global warming. One of the effects could be the shift of the Gulf Stream, which would have an impact on the climate of Europe. The other thing with the rising waters, think about all the coastal cities in the United States, from Miami to LA to all these other cities on the coastline of the United States, but other parts of the world, if the ocean rises. As the tides rise, tides magnify how much the ocean moves. So that would be an effect too. Of course, we live in Nebraska, so maybe we'll get beachfront property out of the deal. I don't know. All right. Now, a lot of people, those that are serious about this being a problem and saying, hey, we've got to do something, have tried to come up with things that can be done. A carbon tax would be businesses that pollute a lot, tax them. And then those businesses that don't pollute are rewarded. They can sell the pollution they don't create to the other ones. Basically, it's an offset. Other things, how about more energy efficient cars? We all have to drive cars, it seems, anymore. Well, have you noticed lately more and more cars are going electric? Remember when I saw my first Prius, I went, what is that? And then more and more cars have shifted, and a lot of car manufacturers. And if you want to laugh at electric cars, laugh at Tesla. I think Elon Musk is laughing to the bank. Also, other forms of energy that are renewable and don't pollute. That's what a lot of these people that are talking about, you have to do something about the environment. These are some of the things they've come up with. And all of them are controversial, and I'm not going to comment on any of them. You do have to also understand there's something called the hydrological cycle. Basically, water. I mean, it evaporates, goes up in the air, it comes down as rain. I mean, it's a long cycle. When I was a kid at Bennington Public Library, I used to be a book years ago called Splash and Trickle about how water went through this whole cycle and it came back as rain, and then they met in the river again, blah, 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 blah. It impressed me as a kid. But that's what we're talking about. But now this hydrological cycle where water gets moved around and can have an effect. For example, acid rain. Acid rain is when you add stuff like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide to the air with pollutant. And when this gets up in the atmosphere and mixes with the moisture there, when it comes down as what we call acid rain. Look at the statue there. In a lot of places in Europe in the 80s and 90s, they start noticing that a lot of these statues that have been around for hundreds of years, all of a sudden were being eaten away by this acid rain. That there was an impact on the old by the new. And so a lot of people would say acid rain, when it comes down, it affects both buildings and infrastructure like roads and bridges. It also affects wildlife and woods and animals and stuff like that. It can affect stuff. This is basically a picture showing what acid rain, how it kind of develops. You get all those stuff in the air mixing with the moisture, and when it comes down, it's going to come down as a different form. And again, I'm not even going to take a look at all the letters and the numbers and everything like that. I was always bad at chemistry. But I understand the concept that they tell me that this does have an impact, and when it comes down as acid rain. Can you show it? Well, if you take a look at these charts here, in America, Pittsburgh and that area is our great industrial manufacturing belt, Pittsburgh Steel, that's why you have the Steelers and stuff. But take a look at the annual sulfide deposit level. And if you look at Europe, this dark area in Europe is where like the Ruhr Valley of Germany and Poland and France and all those areas, the industrial areas up there. And if you look up in England, you'll see that there's an impact correlated on how much industry you have. I remember years ago, I was stationed in New York when I was in the service for a little bit when I became an electrician, and a bunch of us decided to get the heck out of New York. We're Midwesterners. We don't need that stuff. And so we went up in the summer. We got a bus, and we went up to upstate New York, up in the Adirondacks. And it was really nice up there. But the one thing that you noticed, even back then, that was back in the 80s, things were changing. And a lot of these areas, if you look at this picture here, look at the trees. Now, we know a lot of stuff happens today long term, like because of global warming, to go back to the trees. If you go up to the Rockies, a lot of people say that the temperature's been a lot different in the Rockies, and because of that, the frost line is not the frost line anymore, and cold that used to kill bugs that are in the trees up there no longer kills them, and that's killed off a lot of wood up there, and that's led to a lot of wildfires. Well, look at acid rain. It can lead to a lot of problems too, not just on statues, but on trees. And when you think about the water that we drink, it's got to have an impact on us. And one more thing we just have to talk about is deforestation. Deforestation is the burning of forests. A lot of it, of course, obviously we've talked about slash and burn farming in Sweden, where people that are poor will burn the woods because they need land and they can plant. But remember, that land isn't very useful for very long. It doesn't have the same nutrients in the soil like we have here in Nebraska with our prairie and our topsoil. You also have logging and timber and a lot of cutting stuff. And so what ends up happening is there's parts of the world where deforestation is a problem. Madagascar, I love the cartoon, but those lemurs have to move it because there's a lot of deforestation in Madagascar. Brazil is the one country we always keep pointing at, and Brazil, because of the rainforest in Brazil, it's such a huge thing. The Amazon rainforest, when Teddy Roosevelt went up it, it almost killed him. It was such a huge thing. It's like going to another world because the rainforest was so unexplored. Well, today, Brazil, a country with a lot of people, has been expanding. And as it expands, it has been cutting back and moving back this rainforest. On a side note, I always kind of think it's funny when people talk about Brazil cutting all the rainforest. We in America kind of did the same thing. As our pioneers moved into Indiana, Ohio, and before you got to the prairies, we cut off the hard lands and we turned them into farming areas too. It's one of those things where people that are poor, they need to move. They're going to cut trees. They're going to move. But the deforestation in Brazil is staggering. It really is. And that's just a quick look at a little bit of the environmental things. Now, as you guys did your projects, I'm sure you came up with a lot more things than I did. And I can't wait till we get back to school so we can talk about it. But taking a look at how things industrialized could affect the environment, it's important. If you want to take a look at the political ramifications of it, that's a whole different story. And there's a lot of controversy about that today. Remember, of all the facts and stuff I kind of tried to give you here, keep in mind there's a lot of ways of interpreting a lot of stuff. I was simplifying. You put 9 scientists in a room, you're going to have 10 different arguments. Yeah, I know there's only 9 people, but even they can have different points of view. But do keep in mind that there's probably an impact on our environment. The impact, the effect, and what we should do about it, that's a whole different story. So, take care, my friends.